They thought the sky was safe. The clouds were thick, the weather was on their side, and a full German force advanced with absolute confidence. But then, something appeared through a tear in the clouds. Not a squadron, not a bomber group, just one strange silver shape dropping from the heavens like a weapon no one had ever seen before. And in the next few minutes, that single aircraft would stop an entire German formation and leave survivors convinced the Americans had unleashed a secret weapon. What really happened that day still shocks historians, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why. In the early hours of a windswept morning in northern France, 1944, the landscape seemed frozen under a curtain of grey. A low ceiling of clouds hung over the countryside like a slab of iron, smothering every ray of sunlight and silencing the distant thunder of aircraft engines that had become so familiar to soldiers on both sides. For the Americans on the ground, that silence was unsettling. For the Germans, it was opportunity. Since the Normandy breakout, the Luftwaffe had been all but defeated, and the ground forces of the Wehrmacht had learned a harsh reality. When the sky was clear, the Americans owned the battlefield. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a machine so large, so loud, and so devastating, the German soldiers nicknamed it the Razorback from Hell, had become the nightmare of every convoy, fuel truck, artillery column, and staff car. Whenever clouds broke and P-47s appeared, German progress came to a halt. But not today. On that morning, the sky belonged to the Germans. Under the protective shield of heavy haze, a large German formation pushed eastward with unusual confidence. Their engines rumbled through the wet air, echoing over the hedgerows. It was not a small patrol, nor a handful of scattered vehicles. It was a full operational element. Trucks loaded with ammunition, half-tracks packed with infantry, 80mm artillery pieces being towed along narrow roads, fuel lorries driving dangerously close to each other, and armored reconnaissance cars positioned at the front. It was a force moving fast, trying to exploit the rare weather window before the Americans regrouped. Somewhere behind them, American infantry units were stretched thin, exhausted, and dangerously exposed. Analysts in the nearest Allied command post had intercepted scattered reports of a German force maneuvering through the secondary roads near St. Lo, but the thickness of the clouds made aerial reconnaissance nearly impossible. Officers looked at their maps and exchanged silent, worried glances. If the Germans advanced too far while the sky was closed, they could punch a hole straight into the American flank. For the U.S. Army Air Forces, this scenario had a simple translation. If the Thunderbolts don't fly, the Germans will. At a temporary airstrip carved out of French farmland, the crew of one returning P-47 Thunderbolt listened to the rumble of distant artillery and the hiss of mist drifting across the ground. The pilot, Captain James Holloway of the 382nd Fighter Group, had been forced to turn back earlier due to poor visibility. He still carried 2 500-pound bombs beneath his wings, 8 rockets locked under the rails, and enough .50 caliber ammunition to shred armored steel. Holloway was tired, his flight was supposed to be over, and he had already radioed his intention to land. But as he circled above the cloud deck searching for his field, something caught his attention. A narrow tear in the sky. A patch of blue, barely wider than a hangar door, had opened directly beneath him, like an invitation. Instinct made him bank to the left. Training made him stay on course, but something deeper, that strange fusion of duty, intuition, and American stubbornness, made him widen his turn. He descended. Through the small hole in the clouds, the world below emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in chemical solution. First, the tops of hedgerows appeared, then the thin ribbon of a road, then movement, a lot of movement. Holloway squinted. What he saw next made the hair rise on the back of his neck. a line of German vehicles stretching farther than he could measure, snaking through the landscape like a metallic serpent. Trucks, tanks, artillery, fuel carriers, hundreds of them. An entire operational formation exposed, bunched together, and completely unaware that a lone American aircraft was staring straight at them. At that altitude, Holloway should have climbed back into the cloud cover and returned safely to base. He had no wingman, no squadron, no radio contact with ground forces, and no guarantee he would find another opening in the clouds if he needed to escape. But he also knew one thing with absolute clarity. If those German vehicles reached the front lines, American soldiers would die. He leveled the P-47. The massive R-2800 engine rumbled like a storm forming inside a steel cage. His thumb hovered over the armament release switches. Below him, the German column continued forward, oblivious, confident that the weather protected them. No one on the ground looked up. No one expected a single American aircraft to appear. And that was when Holloway made a decision that would echo through military reports, German interrogations, and battlefield legends for decades. He lowered the nose of the Thunderbolt and dove. Captain James Holloway steadied his breathing as the P-47 continued to descend through the thin fracture in the clouds. The Thunderbolt vibrated under him like a living creature, impatient, powerful, and impossibly heavy for a single-engine fighter. Below, the German column stretched for nearly 2 miles, a crawling artery of fuel, explosives, men, and steel trying to pulse its way toward the American front. But no matter how large the German force appeared, Holloway knew something they didn't. When a P-47 carried its full armament, it was a one-aircraft wrecking crew. The documentary narrator explains the machine as the camera glides around a detailed black-and-white reconstruction of the aircraft. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was more than just a fighter. It was a feat of American industrial engineering, the heaviest, most powerful single-engine combat aircraft of the entire war. Its Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine, a 2,000-horsepower monster, sat inside a massive fuselage that could shrug off small arms fire like raindrops. The plane had thick armor plating around the cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, and the remarkable ability to dive faster than almost any German aircraft in service. But its true advantage lay in the technology Germans never managed to replicate: the turbo supercharger. This American invention allowed the Thunderbolt to maintain full power at altitudes where most fighters gasped for air. It supercharged the engine by forcing immense volumes of compressed air into the cylinders, giving the P-47 extraordinary climbing ability and raw speed. German engineers, after examining wrecked Thunderbolts, were stunned by the complexity of the system, a labyrinth of pipes and turbines they simply could not manufacture with wartime shortages. And Holloway was flying one of these machines alone, loaded with enough weaponry to cripple an entire regiment. Under the wings hung 2 500-pound bombs capable of vaporizing tanks, bridges, or clusters of vehicles. Mounted beneath the fuselage rails were 8 high-velocity aircraft rockets, each one powerful enough to pierce armored hulls or ignite fuel trucks. And lining the wings, 8 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, spitting armor-piercing rounds at nearly 800 rounds per minute. Holloway glanced at his gauges. Fuel was low but manageable. Ammunition was full. Rockets were armed. The bombs sat inert, waiting to be released. It was the kind of loadout meant for a squadron strike, not a lone return-to-base flight. He switched the armament panel to hot. Back at the command post miles away, American officers still believed Holloway was safely navigating the cloud cover en route to landing. None of them imagined he had found a gap in the sky. None of them imagined a full German formation was advancing beneath him. And certainly none of them imagined that a single P-47 would soon do the work of an entire wing. As the Thunderbolt dipped lower, the documentary narrator describes what this meant from a tactical perspective. When German convoys moved in dense formation, they became catastrophically vulnerable. Fuel trucks traveled too close to ammunition carriers. Artillery moved without spacing. Infantry rode openly on half-tracks. Camouflage nets remained packed, and because they believed the sky was closed, they didn't bother to disperse. Holloway understood this instinctively. He had studied enemy movement for years. He knew precisely where to strike for maximum collapse. He flew lower until he could see the German helmets glistening with mist. The lead reconnaissance vehicle rumbled forward, unaware of the death forming above them. Soldiers on the roadside smoked, resting against their truck doors, their rifles slung lazily over their shoulders. Officers rode in staff cars, maps unfolded, windows open. There was no tension, no urgency, no expectation of danger from above. Holloway's jaw tightened inside his oxygen mask. He had flown dozens of missions, faced tracers, flak bursts, and Me-109s diving out of the sun. But he had never seen an enemy force so exposed, so blind, and so perfectly arranged for destruction. He banked gently to the right, aligning his approach. The clouds above sealed themselves behind him, as if erasing the path he had taken. He was now truly alone, a single American aircraft in enemy territory, armed, determined, and unseen. The roar of the R-2800 deepened as he increased throttle. The propeller blurred. The airframe trembled at the edge of its aerodynamic threshold. Holloway lowered his flaps, steadied his altitude, and pointed the Thunderbolt straight at the most vulnerable part of the German convoy, the fuel column. With one strike, he could turn the entire road into a chain of erupting fireballs. Inside the cockpit, he flipped the final toggle switch. Bombs armed, rockets ready. 50 calibers, hot. The sight of the German column filled his canopy. Dozens of vehicles, tightly grouped, unprotected, and his alone to destroy. Act 2 ends not with the attack, but with the moment before history bends. Holloway exhaled once, a long, steady breath, and pushed the nose down. The dive began. The Thunderbolt fell from the sky like a steel avalanche, the kind of dive only American engineering could withstand. Captain Holloway kept his eyes locked on the twisting German convoy, the landscape rushing upward with terrifying speed. As he pushed the P-47 into the attack, the airframe moaned under the assault of gravity, but the aircraft, built with industrial-scale robustness, held firm. Below him, the German troops sensed something was wrong far too late. A truck driver at the front of the fuel column was the first to look up. What he saw was not a formation of aircraft, not the expected roar of multiple engines, but the silhouette of a single silver shape hurtling downward at impossible velocity. In the confusion of fog and smoke, some thought it was a bomb. Others believed it was a new type of rocket. One soldier later described it as a weapon from the Americans we had never seen before. Holloway steadied his crosshairs on the largest fuel truck, the ignition point for a catastrophe. At 400 feet, he released the first 500-pound bomb. The explosion was instantaneous, brutal, and overwhelming. A white flash erupted into a column of swirling orange, consuming the truck, the drivers, and 2 vehicles behind it. The shockwave tore through the narrow road, sending debris high into the air. Moments later, the second bomb dropped from his wing, plunging into the center of the convoy. It detonated beneath a group of artillery pieces, flipping them like toys, scattering metal fragments in every direction. German soldiers threw themselves to the ground, stunned by the violence and completely unaware that the attack had come from only one aircraft. Pulling hard on the stick, Holloway climbed out of the dive, the G-forces crushing him into the seat. Smoke filled the sky behind him. A wall of fire now separated the convoy in 2. The classic American tactic of breaking the spine of enemy movement. But he wasn't finished. As he leveled out, Holloway swung the Thunderbolt around for a second pass. This time, he aimed for the rows of half-tracks carrying infantry. German soldiers scrambled for cover, but the road offered no escape. The convoy was trapped, boxed between flaming wreckage on both sides. Holloway fired 4 rockets in rapid succession. The high-velocity aircraft rockets streaked downward like lightning bolts. The first hit a half-track squarely, igniting its ammunition. The second pierced the side of an armored car, erupting in a geyser of flame. The third impacted a staff car, obliterating the officers inside. The fourth struck a cluster of motorcycles, sending burning fragments across the road. The documentary narrator describes this moment with cold precision. The P-47 was not a fighter. It was a mobile artillery unit falling from the sky. Holloway looped around again, determined to dismantle every critical component of the convoy. On his third pass, he unleashed the remaining rockets, targeting the rear of the formation where the communication vehicles traveled. Without radios, without coordination, the entire German advance would collapse. 3 rockets found their mark. The communications truck erupted, its antenna twisting into molten metal. A generator trailer exploded behind it. A second staff car vanished under a rain of burning shrapnel. The Germans now faced a terrifying truth. They had no idea how many aircraft were attacking them. Reports later written by surviving officers claimed they believed there were at least 6, possibly 10, because the rate of destruction seemed impossible to achieve with just one. And Holloway was only beginning. He lined up for a 4th pass, this time with his .50 caliber machine guns. The 8 Brownings roared to life, spitting out a river of armor-piercing rounds. Tracers carved glowing lines across the smoke-filled road. 3 trucks were shredded in seconds. An artillery tractor burst into flames. Crates of ammunition detonated in rapid succession, producing a chain reaction that thundered across the valley. At one point, Holloway flew so low that German soldiers swore the aircraft's wheels skimmed the tops of the hedges. On his 5th and 6th passes, he targeted survivors attempting to regroup around the remaining vehicles. His bullets chewed through tires, engines, hoods, and weapon mounts, ripping metal apart with surgical precision. The P-47's guns, combined with the aircraft's sheer stability, allowed him to deliver strikes that no German fighter or Stuka pilot could match alone. By the 7th pass, the German convoy was no longer a formation. It was a graveyard of steel, fire, and black smoke rising into the grey sky. Vehicles burned in every direction. Fuel splattered across the road, igniting in rivers that ran through ditches and embankments. Ammunition continued to cook off, sending sharp pops into the air like distant firecrackers. Yet the most remarkable element of the attack was not the destruction. It was the panic. In the chaos, German troops began shouting that the Americans had deployed a secret strike aircraft, a new kind of super-fast, super-armed machine capable of annihilating a battalion in minutes. Word of this unknown American weapon would later reach intelligence officers and find its way into Wehrmacht reports. But there was no secret weapon. There was only Captain Holloway and one Thunderbolt. As Holloway climbed through the thickening smoke, he checked his ammunition, nearly empty. Rockets gone, bombs dropped, but the mission was far from over. Below him, the German column was shattered but not yet erased. He banked for another turn. The storm of fire would continue. When Captain James Holloway pulled the P-47 back into a climbing turn, his cockpit was filled with the smell of cordite and burning fuel drifting upward from the inferno below. Heavy black smoke punched through the cloud layer like volcanic plumes. The road that had once carried a confident German formation now resembled a battlefield from another century. Twisted steel, flame, and shattered wood, stretching as far as the eye could see. But the most defining feature of the devastation wasn't what burned. It was what could no longer move. Military doctrine was clear. A mechanized unit lived or died by its logistics. Without fuel, without ammunition, without transport, It didn't matter how many soldiers survived. A division stripped of mobility ceased to function. It became, in the cold language of Allied intelligence reports, combat ineffective. And Holloway had just done that with one airplane. The documentary narrator shifts tone, analyzing the battlefield with the precision of an historian. The first bomb had severed the head of the convoy, while the second tore through its midsection. Rockets annihilated communications and support vehicles. The .50 calibers shredded tires, ignition systems, coolant lines and engines. No amount of bravery or discipline could compensate for the logistical amputation the Thunderbolt inflicted. Below, panic rippled through the German ranks. Officers shouted orders, but radios were silent. The communications truck had been reduced to molten aluminum. Infantry units tried to regroup around the few surviving half-tracks, but most vehicles were immobile, stranded behind burning wreckage. Supply platoons attempted to salvage crates of ammunition, only to watch them ignite in chain reactions. Fuel ran in flaming streams along the roadside, turning ditches into traps of boiling tar. More importantly, the Germans could not advance. Not 1 kilometer, not 1 meter. Their entire axis of movement had been paralyzed by a single, unexpected strike. Even survivors began to understand the scale of their collapse. Some believed they were surrounded by an American ground assault. Others insisted multiple squadrons of US aircraft were circling above. In the chaos, a rumor spread rapidly. A new American Wunderflugzeug, a miracle aircraft, had entered the battlefield. Holloway, unaware of the hysteria he had caused, prepared for another pass despite having little ammunition left. He descended again through the drifting smoke, his shadow stretching across the ruined vehicles. He fired the last of his .50 caliber bursts into the remaining mobile targets: a stray motorcycle, a tractor towing a damaged gun, 2 trucks attempting to maneuver around the burning craters. Each burst produced sparks and plumes of smoke as engines sputtered into silence. As he banked upward, he surveyed the results. What had once been a 2-mile convoy was now a graveyard. What had once been an organized formation was now a maze of flame and disabled machinery. What had once been a threat to American ground forces was now an inert stain of destruction on the landscape. Holloway switched his guns to safe. He had nothing left to fire, yet his impact was only beginning to be felt. The documentary cuts to Allied intelligence maps. Later analysis showed the German unit, already weakened from days of retreat, had concentrated its vehicles tightly to conserve fuel and move quickly under the cloud cover. That concentration, while tactically useful in bad weather, made it catastrophically vulnerable to air attack. One aircraft striking at the right moment had undone an entire operational plan. Forward American units, previously bracing for a German push, reported unexpected silence from the roads. Scouts reached the outskirts of the destroyed column hours later and radioed the first stunned confirmation. The German formation is gone. Not dispersed, not retreated. Gone. Dozens of wrecked vehicles blocked the road so completely that engineers had to carve an alternate path around them. Captured survivors told the same story over and over. They believed a new American weapon had hit them. A kind of super fighter, unlike anything they had seen. Some thought it was jet-powered. Others claimed it fired explosive rounds too rapidly to count. None of them believed it could have been only one plane. Their officers fared no better in their reports. One captain wrote, "We were attacked by a single aircraft of unknown type. Its destructive capability exceeded anything previously encountered." Holloway, meanwhile, climbed back through the grey ceiling of clouds, searching for his airfield. His fuel gauge hovered near empty. The aircraft vibrated from battle strain, peppered with small arms dents and smoke residue. But the Thunderbolt, built like a flying fortress, held together. As he disappeared into the fog, the battlefield below smoldered silently, the flames dying slowly under the rising wind. Hours passed before the last explosion echoed through the valley. It would be days before the road was cleared. It would be weeks before the local Wehrmacht command understood what had truly happened. And it would be decades before historians agreed on the full impact of Holloway's lone strike. But the conclusion, even today, remains unavoidable. One P-47 had just neutralized an entire German force, not through numbers, not through superior conditions, but through the raw combination of American engineering and a single pilot's decision. In the days that followed the destruction of the German convoy, conflicting reports spread through Wehrmacht command posts like wildfire. Officers spoke in hushed tones about a new American aircraft, one faster than the Thunderbolt, more heavily armed than the Typhoon, and more precise than the feared Stuka. Soldiers described an attacker that appeared out of nowhere, struck with impossible force, and vanished back into the clouds before anyone could react. Some claimed it was jet-powered. Others insisted the Americans had deployed a prototype dive bomber, unlike anything used before. A few even believed it was multiple aircraft disguised as one. But all accounts had one point in common. Whatever hit them that day felt like a weapon the Americans had kept secret until the moment of need. The documentary narrator slows the pace, revealing the truth behind the legend. There was no secret aircraft, no classified prototype, no experimental machine built in hidden hangars. There was only a single P-47 Thunderbolt and a single American pilot, Captain James Holloway. Back at Allied headquarters, Holloway submitted his mission report with understated brevity. He detailed the dive through the cloud opening, the strikes on fuel and ammunition trucks, the destruction of artillery and communication vehicles, and the multiple gun passes that neutralized the remnants of the formation. When he finished reading the report aloud, the room fell silent. One colonel finally asked, "You were alone for this entire engagement?" Holloway nodded. Another officer added, "And you expended your full load?" Again, Holloway nodded. A long moment passed before the senior intelligence officer said, "Gentlemen, this one man stopped a German advance." The documentary shifts to post-war analysis. When historians pieced together the scattered German reports, the magnitude of the event became undeniable. Without fuel trucks, the German unit could not move. Without ammunition, it could not fight. Without communication vehicles, it could not coordinate. Without surviving artillery tractors, it had no heavy guns. It had ceased to exist as an operational force. In practical terms, it was the equivalent of losing an entire battalion, disabled not by a division of tanks, not by massed artillery fire, not by a squadron of bombers, but by one American fighter. A single aircraft had forced a major German formation into total paralysis, and it hadn't simply delayed them, it erased them from the battlefield. This tactical impact rippled outward. American infantry, who had braced for a German push, encountered no resistance. Armored columns advanced without contest. Supply convoys reached the front intact, and local commanders reallocated forces that would otherwise have been overwhelmed. The destruction of the column, accomplished in minutes, reshaped the day's operations along that entire sector of the front. But the psychological impact was even greater. Captured German soldiers insisted during interrogation that they had been attacked by ein neues amerikanisches Geheimflugzeug, a new secret American aircraft. One prisoner described the Thunderbolt as too loud, too fast, too heavily armed to be real. Another said, "It attacked like a bomber but moved like a fighter. We believed we were facing a new American design." German officers were equally baffled. A field report found in archives decades later contained this summarizing line: "No single aircraft known to us possesses such explosive and sustained destructive capability." To the Americans, these misunderstandings only reinforced the astonishing truth. All of it had come from the standard workhorse of the U.S. Army Air Forces. A plane built by the thousands, flown by hundreds, designed for rugged performance and overwhelming firepower. A machine shaped not by secrecy, but by the sheer industrial might of the United States. The documentary narrator transitions into a tribute. The Thunderbolt was not elegant like the Spitfire, nor sleek like the Mustang. It was a brute, a tool forged from American steel, American factories, and American belief that firepower wins battles. It was the fighter that could dive faster, hit harder, and survive punishment no other aircraft could endure. And Holloway had wielded it with surgical precision. The film cuts to a quiet moment. Holloway stepping down from his Thunderbolt the day he returned, the fuselage scorched with smoke, the wings empty of ordnance, the canopy smeared with oil. Mechanics inspected the aircraft and found bullet dents along the lower panels. One joked that the Germans had managed to hit him with everything except accuracy. Holloway didn't smile. He simply answered, "They won't be advancing today." His words proved prophetic. They didn't advance the next day, or the day after, or ever again in that sector. With the German convoy destroyed, the American front stabilized, and the momentum of the Allied advance continued unbroken, pulled forward by the unexpected heroism of one pilot and the unstoppable power of one airplane. By the war's end, many legends would rise from the ashes of Europe. But few stories encapsulated American air power more perfectly than this one. The day a single Thunderbolt stopped a German force so completely that the enemy believed it must have been something beyond ordinary, something secret, something impossible. But the truth, the real truth, was far more impressive. It wasn't a secret at all. It was American engineering, American firepower, and an American pilot who refused to let the enemy advance. If this story surprised you, imagine what's coming next. Subscribe to the channel and continue exploring the hidden chapters of WW.